What did America's founders believe about America in the Bible? Occupying Till He Comes at Southwest Prophecy Ministries.
Welcome, friends. This is Dane Rome, your announcer for today's Last Days Beacon program. Thanks again for listening. Thanks for joining us. And just a reminder that these programs are supported by your gifts to this ministry. If you would like to contribute to this ongoing faith ministry, which deals with Bible prophecy and current events, simply go to our website to contribute. Our website address is www.swpm.us. You'll find a donate link on the homepage. The website address again is www.swpm.us. Thank you for your prayers and support for this faith ministry. On today's program, Dr. Schnitker interviews Paul Dinger, author of the October Last Days Beacon article entitled America is Forecast in Bible Prophecy. Mr. Dinger offers a rebuttal of the recent trend among prophecy teachers who teach that America is not prophesied in the Bible. In these interviews, he makes the case that America's greatest leaders, from Christopher Columbus to Presidents McKinley and Reagan, have taught that America has a special place in end times Bible prophecy. So let's join Dr. Schnitker and Paul Dinger for today's informative message.
Thank you, Dane, and welcome again, friends. Today we continue a series of interviews with Paul Dinger, author of the October Last Days Beacon article entitled America is Forecast in Bible Prophecy. As we learned in last week's show, this is a view that is not universally held by evangelical Bible prophecy teachers today. Paul, welcome back for today's program.
Thank you, David. Nice to be here.
As I mentioned last week, this is a groundbreaking article in a couple of ways. One is its content, which we've never really explored in one of our monthly articles, but also the fact this is the longest article on record, 8 pages. And you promised that the November article will probably be an 8-pager as well. So we appreciate all the hard work and many years of study that have gone into your convictions regarding this important matter. So let's jump right into it. You write in your article that there is a long genealogy of American belief that America is the fulfillment of Daniel's prophecy of a last great empire, a stone mountain empire, as it's referred to in Daniel chapter 2. So let's talk about that genealogy in America's belief system.
Well, how far it goes back is a good question. It could go back to Israel's revolt in 70 AD, but where it really pops up in modern times is in 1492, when Columbus returned telling his financiers, Spain, that he discovered this giant landmass that had been hidden. Spain had just evicted its Muslim overlords who had been oppressing it for centuries. And Spain believed that these two events, months apart, meant that God was electing them as Daniel's fifth empire. And we don't have time to go into it now, but there was good reason for them to think something like that. But Columbus's discovery basically opened up the idea across Europe that the last days of history were beginning. And so within, I guess, a century, England had become the leading contender for Daniel's Fifth Empire. But as the Puritans were coming over to America, the idea in England was that the land of the British colonies would become that ultimately that fifth empire of Daniel. And so this idea percolated for a little less than a century in England and in the American colonies, so that when George Berkeley, one of the great minds of England, wrote this poem, Verses on America, he was pretty much pointing the finger at America and saying, this is where Daniel's fifth empire will arise. Well, from that point, from 1726 on, this idea never died. It apparently, if you judge by the timing, helped to trigger the First Great Awakening, helped to trigger or helped to bring the English evangelists, Gilbert Tennant and the Methodist Wesley brothers over to America. The American founders were born after this poem was published, so they learned about it in school, particularly in college and seminary, so that by the time the American Revolution was beginning, this was the spiritual platform from which the revolution arose, that this is a land that God has forecast in Bible prophecy, and this gave them great confidence. As we will see in the November issue of Last Days Beacon, the founders memorialized this belief in the two symbols, the only two legally enacted symbols of America, the American flag and the Great Seal. But in the 19th century, it continued, so that you have George Bancroft, known as the father of American history. He wrote the big American history books, which he subtitled from the last line of Berkeley's poem. So by the time you get to the end of the 19th century, this idea was just clinging to America, that America was the beginning, the manifestation of Daniel's fifth empire prophesied in the Old Testament, and the beginning of the Christ millennium, forecast in Revelation 20. Daniel's fifth empire and the millennium are essentially the same thing.
Well,
does that answer your question?
It does. And you've made reference to Berkeley's 1726 prophetic poem, and I think it would be helpful to our listeners for me to quote from the last stanza of this, and then I'd like you to unpack what he means. Now, George Berkeley wrote this in 1726, 6 years before the birth of George Washington, America's first and perhaps greatest president. So as Washington was growing up, he was steeped in this philosophy that Berkeley expressed. And by the way, Berkeley, George Berkeley, he didn't found that, but there is a famous college in California, the University of California at Berkeley, that was named in honor of George Berkeley, which is kind of ironic if you understand the political philosophy that governs the University of California at Berkeley. But nevertheless, he wrote in 1726 a poem called Westward the Course of Empire. And the last stanza reads this way: Westward the course of empire takes its way. The first 4 acts already past. A 5th shall close the drama with the day. Time's noblest offspring is the last. Paul, would you explain what this last stanza means?
Well, this was the stanza that electrified American leaders. What Berkeley was doing, now you have to keep in mind that this idea of Daniel's fifth and last empire manifesting in real time had been kicked around for something like 200 years or more. So he wasn't introducing something new. He was introducing ideas that people were well aware of. And basically he took 2 ideas, and that was this ancient idea, it goes back to ancient Egypt, that history, follows a westward progression, just like the heavenly bodies do every day. You know, the sun rises in the east and it moves to the west, the moon, the stars. And so he was saying that westward the great empires move. And of course, according to Daniel's prophecy, that was the movement. You had Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome, and then there was one last empire left out there, but they'd all moved in a westerly direction. So he was bringing in the second idea, which is that Daniel's prophecies of the last empires were being fulfilled, but he was pointing at America and saying that America will be that fifth and last empire, the Stone Mountain that Daniel forecast. And if you could just read that very last line, David.
A fifth shall close the drama with the day. Time's noblest offspring is the last.
So he was pointing at America, saying America is the fifth empire, and that it will become the greatest empire in history. And America is today the greatest nation in history. Is greater than all of the ancient empires, certainly greater than ancient Rome. So Berkeley has become a prophet, according to God's definition of a prophet in Deuteronomy 18.
Amen. I mean, this last stanza, when you understand what he's saying from a biblical and historical perspective, is really spine-tingling. That Berkeley's vision was that America is that fifth empire, that Stone Mountain empire that would be the vestibule that would usher in the millennium and the second coming of Christ, and that America is time's noblest offspring and the last of the great empires. That was George Berkeley's understanding, and as what you're saying is this was the common understanding of the greatest scholars of the colonial era in America's history.
Well, it got a little mixed up. The colonial leaders tended to focus on the Christ millennium. In fact, Jonathan Edwards, known as the greatest theologian of America, he would write things like, the Christ millennium, it may begin right here in New England. And that was the kind of thing that the people who were saying things like that weren't considered kooks. I mean, this was said by politicians, by pastors, by people on the street, people in taverns. We'll see next month, David. Americans carry around with them every day, handle with them every day, that symbol of America as Daniel's fifth empire, Christ's Stone Mountain. I mean, this is a symbol that's in front of them every day.
And we're going to unpack that. I'm sure you're giving our listeners a real sense of anticipation as to what you're going to be revealing in your next article. We're just kind of teasing that out. Well, we're going to close for today. I think this has been very informative and provocative as we understand the mindset of many of America's greatest thinkers, from George Berkeley to Governor John Winthrop, and many others, even into the 19th century, who had this view, this strongly held view and belief that America is the last great empire, the fifth monarchy, as many called it, that would be the vestibule, that would be the prelude to the second coming and the establishment of a worldwide kingdom. And that is a picture of America that has been lost in modern day, and in my view, desperately needs to be recovered by Christians in this country.
May I say one?
Yes, go ahead.
May I say one last thing? So here you have the first presidential election of the 20th century. This is at the end of the October article. And President William McKinley's re-election campaign is based on that line that you read, westward, the course of empire makes its way. So the idea that America is the fulfillment of Daniel's fifth empire was at the center of politics. I mean, this is the president who's saying this. This isn't some wild nut job presidential contender. This is the president of the United States, and at the beginning of the 20th century.
And his platform must have been rather popular because William McKinley was reelected in 1900 to a landslide.
Right.
And he was running against an evangelical, hard to believe, William Jennings Bryan, the fundamentalist fool of the Scopes trial, as he was known later. But he was the Democrat candidate in 1896 and again in 1900. So we had two Bible-believing fundamentalists running against one another as recently as 1896 and 1900.
Right.
It's hard to believe how things have changed in a mere 118 years.
Right.
Well, this is exciting, Paul. I'm really learning a lot, and I trust our listeners are as well. But we're going to have to close for today. Friends, please join us next week as we continue to interview Paul Dinger regarding his wonderful October Last Days Beacon article entitled America is Forecast in Bible Prophecy. And now our announcer, Dane Rome, will share how you may obtain multiple copies of this informative article.
Thank you, Dr. Snitker. Today, we're offering an excellent article to accompany this series of messages. Our October Last Days Beacon article is entitled America is Forecast in Bible Prophecy. In this article, Paul Dinger offers the rebuttal case to the America isn't in the Bible argument in the court of public opinion. You may order 5 copies for $5 or 25 copies for $15 contribution. Just go to our website, www.swpm.us, and go to our bookstore. Type in the title of the article, America is Forecast in Bible Prophecy. The website address again is www.swpm.us. Please join us again for next week's Last Days Beacon program, brought to you by Southwest Prophecy Ministries. And until then, this is your announcer, Dane Rome, saying thanks for listening.